Welcome to the Culture Chat. I'm Olivia Bryant, and you're joining us where culture and conversation connect. Here's the part where we need to then do the re-record. I was so ready. I want to make sure I say it correctly. Iris McQuillan-Grace. Yeah.
You can blame my parents for giving me a 15-letter hyphenated last name.
Actually, I've done it to my kids too, so you're not alone. But I do see all the problems I've created in doing this. But I thought that was a good, confident, and grounded intro, so we're going to try that again.
I'm going to be very transparent.
What?
People love this kind of stuff, like raw, real, human interaction. So I personally don't think it's a bad thing to include this conversation, because
we can have a whole loop. We can have a whole loop. That would actually be the whole podcast, though, with me. Like,
people would love that.
You just have like me doing that the whole time if you want, because I am shockingly weird. So,
I mean, Lee, I'm rolling with your jam here. It's hard. It's hard for me, but I'm not going to shut any doors.
This is so awesome. I'm so inspired to be on this call with you even now because you're being so brave.
Thank you. It's brave every day. Every day.
No, I'm telling you, Olivia, this is your book.
Brave every day.
This is the book, because I'm literally watching you in action and in practice.
In practice for what? We don't know. We're just practicing.
Right? We don't practice, right? You don't always practice skill for an end goal, right? Like, think about the way that we encourage our children to learn, right? Like, I want my daughter to go to ballet, but I don't think she's going to be a prima ballerina.
I'll do that out of the recording so she never hears that.
She's practicing. She's practicing all of these skills that will have potential impact the rest of her life. The social emotional learning. Exactly. Right? You have no idea where this is going to lead, but I think that's what's so exciting about what you're doing. And that it doesn't come easily to you, I think, is also for me, like an untapped resource or value add for why you leading a podcast is so especially impactful. Because I think there's voices that are so confident, lots of things, and blah, 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 blah. And I think it's so, I kind of don't want to talk. I kind of just want you to talk. Because it's so.
It needs to be conversational. So
okay.
We have to talk together. Okay.
Okay.
All right. We're going to Iris McQuillan-Grace. Yes?
Correct. Perfect. You can call me Schmoopy Poopy Pants, and that would be fine.
Right, but we want to elevate your branding, so we're going to definitely go with your full name.
Yes. Okay, let's do it.
All right. Let's take 2. Welcome today to the Culture Chat. I'm Olivia Bryant, and we will be speaking where conversation and culture connect. I am joined with Iris McQuillan-Grace today, and she is an HR talent leader and learning nerd, leveraging her background in collaborative performance and human-centered design to help organizations navigate internal transformation and empower their employees to develop new skills and become the leaders they were meant to be. As a board member of ATDCT and a member of the Executive Council for Leading Change, she is a transformational leader within her organization. And welcome, Iris. I'm so pleased and thrilled to have you today on the Culture Chat podcast.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, how your journey into HR, anything you'd like to share with our audience today?
Sure. So I think like most HR folks, I started teaching Shakespeare in a maximum security facility group home. And I think that's pretty common as an entry point to corporate HR. No. So I was an educator, right? You know, I taught for 7 years in a variety of different environments. And then I decided to make the transition to corporate by way of learning and development, and found it really difficult to walk people through those transferable skills, right? Between pedagogy and andragogy and learning theory and a bunch of those things. And, you know, I went to a staffing agency and I was just temping and I was trying to figure it out. And then that staffing agency said, I think you'd be a great recruiter. And I said, sure. And that was trial by fire. That was fire hose to the face. That was that is high volume recruitment, everything from admins to CMCOs, everything from fashion to finance. And I really loved learning about the different interview styles, different how to coach candidates through the process. I built a series of trainings when I was with that staffing agency to help streamline the intake process, but also sort of help, get your resume together, how to interview, how to send follow-ups. We started to see a connection between people who felt really prepared through that learning and their ability to land their next role. And that felt really wonderful. And I thought, maybe I'll just be a recruiter then. And so I placed myself at the Center for Reproductive Rights, where I was for 3 years. And I remember going to my boss at the staffing agency, and I said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is, got you a placement. The bad news is, it's me. And she laughed. And I think I have been so incredibly fortunate to have been so open to so many opportunities that I feel like the universe said, okay, great. Well, what about this? And I said, sure, that sounds great. Right. And so when the center presented itself, because I took the intake when I was at the agency, and I thought, that's my job. Right. It was mission aligned. It felt really connected to, they were looking to grow their TA function. They had been recruiting on spreadsheets, and there was a lot of opportunity in the DI space to operationalize their commitments through their recruitment process. And I saw potentiality to grow their learning and development function, which would take me full circle, and on talent management. And so that's what I did with those 3 years, right? So, in the first year, we scaled the organization 60% globally. We implemented an ATS. We implemented structured hiring. We saved the organization $500,000 in the first 9 months because we were no longer agency dependent. We were able to close that time to hire. And, we started to do some reporting on quality of hire. All of that was really great. Because I had built those relationships, then launching the learning and development function and the professional development pieces, but also the performance management pieces, right? It became an extension on the social capital that I received. And because the center is such a important place, and I could really spend a lot of time talking about its importance. But I want to be thoughtful that you have many listeners, and this is not a political discussion. But one of the things that was so instrumental to my role now and to my ability to have the career that I now have is because I have a lot of organizational maturity. So it sort of functioned in this way where you had a board of directors, and you had, right, there was this rigor around creating SOPs and quite a lot of matrix because of the global, right? But they were 200 employees, and because it's a nonprofit, those budgets were real lean. So you had sort of the agility of a startup. So I was able to try a lot of things, pilot a lot of things, iterate a lot of things. And I know we're going to talk about human-centered design in a little bit. And that was really where I was able to cut my teeth on putting that ideology and that methodology into practice, right? We didn't talk about it in that way. That was really putting those pieces together, right? Because inherent in all the things that I've just said are the change management pieces, the employee experience pieces, right? The stakeholder engagement, the buy-in that's necessary, and the retention checks to make sure that those behavioral changes and the process changes are really absorbed and become part of the cultural fabric of the organization, right? Setting those and sort of understanding, are we tracking the right things to make sure that that retention is happening? And if we're falling short of meeting those metrics, what are the interventions necessary to get us back on track, right? A lot of that, I don't think I would have had the opportunity and exposure to if I weren't reporting to a COO and a CHRO, respectively, in a much larger company. So when the opportunity came to join Oliver, 5,000 people with a global footprint across 46 countries to own employee experience, I really felt like I was in a place to take what I had learned and step it up a notch for 2.0. And that's where I've been for almost 2.5 years.
Excellent. I love you're speaking to an iterative, creative process as you have gone through your journey. I feel like HR in and of itself has transformed significantly, probably in the same period of time that you have been learning all of these tools.
Yeah.
HR itself has been in a transformational phase. So talk to me a little bit from your point of view and your experience about the employee experience and the people experience movement that we're seeing happen in the current times.
Yeah, I think when I found human-centered design in 2019, 2018, it felt like a validation of the things that I was doing instinctually. And maybe that's because I come from a background of experiential performance, collaborative performance, right? Where you are, and if you think about a design sprint, right? So design thinking and running those pieces, it's very similar to being in a rehearsal room. Let me walk you through that, because I don't know that unless you lived your life in the theater, you're like, I don't know that makes sense. Okay. So if we're running a design sprint, we're pulling together across, is that too loud?
Is it? Keep going.
Okay. So we're bringing together a cross-functional SMEs, right? We're getting everyone together to solve a problem. That is a writer. Those are actors. That's a producer. That's a set designer. That's a costume designer, right? You're all coming together to solve the problem that a consumer is going to buy, purchase, understand, right? And then you pilot different ways to build the product, which is the play. And then you further pilot and test it through dress rehearsal and every performance. And it anchors on feedback. Every single rehearsal, every single performance, you are constantly getting notes, and notes are feedback. And so it is ingrained, right, that it is part of the process. And actually, when you don't get feedback, like maybe it's not a good thing, right? Feedback is inherent for you to improve. And that is part of the fabric of what it means to be a theater maker, right? So when I call myself a theater rat, and I saw that you put that in my little bio, and I love that forever. I will stand to be a theater rat until I die. You can put it on my grave. I think that's what I need, right? Someone who is metabolized and fully sort of sits in the expectation of feedback is my friend. I want to work with cross-functional folks to get a job done. I'm unafraid to look silly, foolish, and messy while we're in the making process, and we're piloting constantly to continuously refine based on the feedback we're getting from our consumers. Now you take those principles and you funnel them through, because shockingly enough, if I spoke about it that way in corporate America, I think I would get a lot of blink, blink, thanks, bye. Funneling through the language and the vocabulary and the framework of human-centered design and design thinking, and even sort of like this product methodology, like pick the one you want, right? To me, we synthesize and we are speaking, there's quite a lot of overlap in those three pieces. It gives, depending on what your audience, the ability to frame that language and set that up so that you get the necessary stakeholder buy-in. You're able to begin to implement some of these pieces, and you're able to stay really agile when you're piloting these things that are incredibly transformative. How that impacts my role in employee experience, or how that informs rather my role in employee experience, is my singular priority. How is the end user, who for us is our employee, going to experience these moments that matter on the employee life cycle, any changes, any process updates, how are we metabolizing their feedback as we are iterating and ideating, any and all of the above.
And so speaking from my own background in employee experience, I think I 100% agree, first of all, with the points you're making. I will say that I was definitely more of a trial and error, and I don't feel, looking at it in retrospect, that I knew I was following this process when I began. I could see it in hindsight, but not so much when I set forth with a plan. It was a little bit more of a garage band, okay, let's, give it a whirl, right? And see what the response is. And the response was really positive. In that same position now, I would have a much clearer vision that culture is one of the components that you're looking to change or to evolve, might be a better word, for employee experience. So you're talking about these moments that matter. You're talking about this iterative, creative process that is constant feedback loops. You're talking comparing it to a theater experience where you show up in front of a live audience every night and you maybe get notes. How does an HR professional package this into, I have a culture issue, right? We have maybe a dated perception of HR. We're not seen as strategic business partners. We're seen as tactical, hire fire type professionals, right? That's a bit your role. So how do you transform this and package all of what you're talking about into an HR person who feels like they don't know where to begin?
Well, I wouldn't include all the things that I've just said, right? Because again, right, the reason I brought that out, right? So I think part of the reason that I raised that is because you'd asked about my specific background. And part of the reason I brought in the connection is because when I found HCD, it validated some of the ways of working that I was doing instinctually, as you say, right? And it gave me a language to bring other people on the ride, right? And that is the key piece here, right?
So speaking of this sort of theater rat idea, the concept of constant feedback loops, the iterative creative process, how do we pare this down for HR professionals who may be listening to this, wondering how would I begin this process to transform my HR programs, my HR team to this new experiential process instead of a tactical approach?
Well, I would say first things first, don't feel like you have to go get an MFA in acting, and don't feel like you have to go spend 30 years in the theater. I would say feel free to completely divorce yourself unless it feels interesting to you, right? And second, as I would say, like I sort of shared all of that, right? Because the original question had been like, how did I find my way into it? And having come from that background, as you had shared, sort of doing this stuff, being iterative, piloting things, having feedback loop was sort of instinctual. And when I found human-centered design, it found like a corporate container that I could funnel in through the things that I felt, innately and instinctually that I was doing. And it gave a corporate language for me to bring other stakeholders along for the ride. I will say that human-centered design is not the language. If that's not the language that is going to be absorbed in your particular culture, right? Or in your particular company or organization, then maybe you bring in design thinking or systems thinking or a product mindset, right? So what I would say is if what we discuss sounds like the spidey sense is going off, you also feel, hey, I'm sort of doing that already. I would say you probably are, right? Honor that for yourself and maybe find a way to lean in. Because the thing that was so valuable to me about finding human-centered design, again, was that I was able to get buy-in using that framework. And it is not by no means the only process. So the part that I would recommend starting with is taking that internal landscape analysis. Are there methodologies that you're already using? Agile, waterfall, human-centered design. Could you, right? Do you have a company that has a product? Well, then maybe a product mindset applied to the employee experience is the way forward, right? What is the language your company is already speaking? And then measure against that, is it successful?
Right.
Right? Because those are the data points. Because like you could be running a waterfall model and you're like, that's maybe not the why not come on it? Or you could be running a product, mindset, but it's not working. Or it's not right, or it's not garnering the results, right? That then is enough data to bring it to stakeholders. Because what I wouldn't recommend is you come in and you say, I listened to this podcast, we're all going to do human-centered design now, and we're all going to take theater classes. That's not the takeaway, right? The takeaway is, if this is interesting, and I hope that it is, and it feels like there's some connection of stuff you're already doing, and I hope that that's true, right? Because I don't know very many HR practitioners, as you say, in this rise of how HR is transforming, who aren't piloting things, who aren't iterating ideas, who aren't establishing feedback loops, right? Potentially, though, we're doing those in a silo, or we're doing them reactively or in isolation without considering mapping the whole process, right? And thinking about that end to end. And that's where something like human-centered design can be really effective and successful.
So let's talk about that, because we are fast forward to what I would consider is a fairly progressive stage within the HR mindset, which is you are iterating, you are bringing new programs forward, you're vested in the culture transformation. But I love what you called out, which oftentimes it ends up being in a silo. You mentioned your organization is 4,000 or 5,000 people and similar size to the organizations I've worked in the past. And oftentimes I have found that you have those culture ambassadors, those change ambassadors who do want to see transformation, evolution within the culture of the organization. And they come from different functions. They're not all in HR. But you end up with a rift between those who are looking forward, who want to experience this culture, a human-centric design emphasis. They want to experience it differently. And then you have, on the other side of the rift, maybe the mindset of, well, this is how we do things here. This is the way it's always been done, right? This type of language that can come from legacy, long tenured employees, maybe different career levels, right? We know that depending on
generational differences,
exactly,
technical differences,
yeah.
many. Yeah, no, I
So
fully.
how do you bridge that rift as you're aiming to make a transformation? You're incorporating these human-centric design elements into your HR practices. How do you bridge into those other culture challenges?
Yeah, I would say that, again, sort of taking step one would be taking that full step back and saying, how do we talk about our employee touch points right now? Is there a way, right? And then think about the language that is necessary to move the needle to get investment. And let's say you don't get any. You can still be applying these, right? Best case scenario, though, you're able to be transparent. I worked at places where we have built entire processes based on human-centered design, and no one has known, right? But, right, so I would say take that temperature, because what I'm hearing, right, is you bring a change to bear and you have dissenters, and that, or it completely derails, 80% done. Because that never happens when we do change. It never happens. I would argue that a majority of the time you hit the rocks because you haven't done the design work to map your stakeholders at the beginning, and you haven't done the employee journey mapping, right, to identify those trigger points. So when we're talking about making cultural shifts, we've really done what I would call measure twice, cut once, right? So what I would say is taking a step back, and the benefit of launching maybe I would hope that is someone who is given change, right, and is often in HR, right? We are like, here you go, here's the change. Okay, thanks, bye. Hope everybody does it. And don't worry, your bonus is benched to it. But hey, pew, pew, pew. And you're like, oh man, this is a vibe, right? That you have enough of a runway, right, where you can look at and do some proactive analysis and forecasting, right? And that's where a tool like employee mapping and stakeholder mapping are going to be really critical. So when you get handed a change, you can say, okay, so we are changing travel policy for senior manager and above. Okay, well, here are the dissenters, here are the change folks, here's the way the language should go, here are the channels, right? It becomes a way for you to move much faster if you can do those pieces in advance. So I love a tool from PIN. They have a free employee mapping journey tool that you can use that will cover all of those repeatable, right, anchors on the employee life cycle, right, those touch points. And then you can start to identify and build those for the particular sort of employee personas, right, ICs, managers, senior managers, right? And then if you want to take one step further, you can do, are there additional considerations to make, as you say, long tenure, generational considerations, geographical considerations, other potential identities, right? So access needs, or, any sort of, someone returning from a leave, right? Maybe, right? I mean, you can sort of take the rabbit hole down there. I leave that to you. If you have a team of 150 people, really lean into that. What you get from that, though, then, is it's now on paper and it's visual. And you have another tool to take stakeholders on the ride. So when you're approaching, you now get to do a diagnostic and say, okay, onboarding for us is 67 steps. Does that feel onerous, maybe? Should we maybe think about a streamline opportunity? Performance management is one questionnaire. okay, I don't know, maybe we could lean into that a little bit, right? You then get to have a holistic, so those silos are broken down and you get to see the interconnectedness of the different teams and their levels of responsibility. And it's all as opposed to one SOP at a time.
Right. And drawing back on some of the commentary you made earlier, you spoke to incorporating the language that is already being used within the organization and applying that same language to your human-centric program design. You're now talking about creating personas and demographic breakdown of really your audience, which are your employees. And coming from my marketing background, this is another element that any professional marketing person would apply to product. Your salespeople are going to be applying to their sales strategy. So now you're talking, what I'm hearing is basically a statement of, as HR professionals in this transformational space we're in, out of that tactical into strategic people experience, employee experience partners, you're really applying business applications to how we treat our people. It's no more enough to check I-9s to have to have the basics covered, right? It's now really a business application. You're talking about stakeholders, right? And how to get their buy-in and support as you go through large change management initiatives for your employee experience changes.
Well, because are we designing change for the end user, for the people? And also acknowledging that your stakeholders, I think sometimes we sort of separate out that CEOs don't count as employees, right? And so when you do this employee mapping, you are inherently also doing that stakeholder mapping. How are people going to want to see the information in order to say yes is a question that we need to be asking all the time when we're designing our benefits, when we're talking about open enrollment, right? And those pieces around marketing, right? When we talk about behavior economics, when we talk about, right, those right? The same ways, you are absolutely right. The same ways we attempt to influence consumer behavior, leveraging HCD allows us to have those same considerations where ethically applicable to our own employees. Are we designing for a real human being and all of their many, multitudes, right?
Love that, because you're 100% accurate, in my opinion, and in my success, it has been because I have 100% applied those marketing mantras and practices to my customer. And my customer, as an HR professional, were my employees. And it wasn't done in a way to sell a product. It was done in a way to attract and retain top talent. In our current market right now, it may feel that it's less needed because there's a saturation of available talent. And so this kind of care and consideration, careful evaluation feels, I believe, the candidate experience is a perfect example. We're not seeing companies, top notch in some of these areas. And it's only because the markets swing, but the market's going to swing back where you're going to have yet again, a talent where the competition for talent will be high, and organizations are going to need to re-up their game and their candidate experience, their employee experience, their offboarding experience, and everything in between. And I feel, and Iris, I don't know how, obviously you are full-time working and very busy woman, but do you feel that the reputation of many of the organizations that have gone a bit viral for, say, negative candidate experience, negative offboarding experience, how does that reputation, positive or negative, weigh in to this employee experience journey that you're speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again what is so powerful about an employee journey, right? Is you see it all. And you then begin to see the connective tissue between how I attract, how I entice, how I retain, how I send somebody off to their next opportunity, how I exit, that it is really a continuum, right? And there is connective tissue so that my journey through this company, right, is consistent with the mission, vision, values, and how you operationalize that is, you can have callbacks across, right? So Are we asking the same interview questions that will then echo in your performance management in your 30-day, right? Or are we being clear about our values through our interview process so that when we then hold our employees to the standard for them during the performance management process, that's clear and we're level setting from the beginning, right? When we talk about your opportunities within the organization, career paths, competency models, right? Are we being clear in the recruitment process by asking the questions, putting it on our job description so that when people come in, they have an understanding of, okay, this is what's necessary. This is what's new. So there is that reinforcement, right? If you put on that LD hat, right? How many times do I need to see a piece of information before I really retained it? And have I experienced it in enough variety that it becomes consistent so I am confident in it, right? So it's not just, oh, I understand it, but now I see it and now it is a cultural behavior that we've anchored against.
And so back to that army, small army of HR professionals who may be in their organization trying to bring this transformation to life, facing resistance or saboteurs, if we want to be bold, that this is not critical, it's not the way it's always been done. Why, isn't this just the fluff, shall we say? The stakeholders are key to, because
yes, you're never going to get anywhere if you don't have. And what I will say is stakeholders are not always the top of the organization, right? It depends on the change, right? There's a lot of context that goes into identifying. But I think, and I really believe this, and if anybody's listening and wants to fact check me, find me in the chat or find me, and we can talk about it. But in my experience, if you can pull it out on paper and you can see this is the employee journey, then when I understand we're changing the onboarding process and we're going to get people, and now we want to get managers more involved, we can identify that it's going to be a pain point. And people are going to be like, hard pass, that's not how we've usually done it. And you can bake into the comms and the process. Now we're going to do one-on-one. We're going to pilot it so that when so human-centered design is ideate, ideate, prototype, and iterate, right? So while we're prototyping, we're piloting, and then we're iterating it constantly on feedback, right? So, in this ideation phase, if you've done this mapping, you can identify you can anticipate who those folks are. Are you always going to get outliers? Are you always going to get people who you're like, I did not see that coming, right? And then you can be designing the process and the retention efforts for this change. Who needs an extra, one-on-one? Do we need to do a town hall? Do we need to pilot it with this person? And then because this person has a lot of internal influence, they then can be the face of the change. All of those decisions can come from a really clear map, right? Oh, you know what? We just did this change and this person did it and this was really effective. We should get them in the task force so that they can send, maybe we do an internal podcast and they do it. Or, right, we do a fireside chat and we do with the CEO, but then we have it moderated by this person because everybody loves them. So we'll have that connective tissue there. Or maybe we'll do this team first and then we'll have, we'll do it team by team by team, right? It helps you understand how to operationalize whatever the change is in a way that is as frictionless as humanly possible.
Right. So let's go to that point of you've identified your stakeholders, you have done your mapping, you have benchmarked that this change is a benefit to the entire employee experience. You are looking for that yes from those key stakeholders, and you either A, are ensure you're going to get it, or you need to pitch it in a way that you ensure you get the yes because it's go time.
Yeah. So I would say you got to do that early and often, right? I would say before, that's actually the first step because no change is going to happen. So this goes into how do you prioritize what to do, right? Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to do this employee mapping exercise. You're going to be like, everything has to change, right? And you have to prioritize what you're going to do. And so what I would recommend is identifying what is going to be, do you have a quick win? You already know this stakeholder, it's going to do this, right? Because then you get to build some momentum, right? That's one way to go. Is the biggest change going to be the hardest, but it's the biggest priority? Okay, right? You understand these are the stakeholders. Having this mapping done should give you the insight and data you need for how somebody's going to want it. Does somebody want a dashboard? Does somebody want a PowerPoint? Does somebody only want Excel? To know that everyone else has said yes, and then they'll say yes. Does someone want to be the first person to say yes, right? You will have that insight from this mapping exercise, ideally, right? And if you don't, if you're new to the company, go to that person. Go to the people who you know that person. Get the information, right? Do the user research that goes into the mapping. As you're building those personas, that's where that comes from, right? So we're in this ideation phase. We're really collecting a lot of data, and then you can reference that in this sort of push and how we're framing it for them, right? You know, when I was working at the center, it's a legal organization. So I think the funnest jokes I got to make were Control-Alt-Delete jokes, you know, right? And that's no shade on the cup, right? But the appetite wasn't there, right? I work in an advertising agency now, and now I can put GIFs in my PowerPoint.
Guys, I'm sorry. What?
I just want to show you this GIF I saw the other day.
Do you mean GIF?
No, it's G-I-F. It's pronounced GIF.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, my mistake. I didn't know we were suddenly talking about peanut butter.
Right? I can, you know, and if I don't, I sort of feel like I'm left behind, right? With sort of like what everyone's doing. So you need to frame it in how someone's going to receive the information. Like my former CHRO loved a PowerPoint, but only wanted 2 slides and only wanted the top 3 things, and that was it. My COO wanted, here's the dashboard, I want you to hyperlink to all the data. I may not look at it, but I need to know that it's been done, right? And so when I had to when I had to pitch an idea to both of them, I knew that I had to do it, combining those efforts. I also sent pre-reads to both of them. I also had pre-meetings with both of them, right? Because I knew that's what those 2 people needed. When I met with the senior leadership team more broadly, I knew I had already done that work, and I had those as ambassadors. So when I brought it, everyone was looking at those people anyway, and they said yes, and everyone co-signed the idea, right? Having an intrinsic, or rather really not intrinsic, having an intimate understanding, right? A very clear understanding of who your stakeholders are and how they want the information is part of that mapping exercise. And that is part of the ROI of why you invest the time, energy, and resources in doing it thoroughly.
Love that you mentioned ROI, because this is one of the hardest points to demonstrate. You mentioned your CEO likes to see that data, likes to see the dashboards, worked, lived, breathed a data organization, and yet justifying or validating the decision to make a change initiative like evolving your employee experience can be very hard to reinforce with data as to the why it has to happen and the ROI that can come out of that investment. How do you handle that?
I mean, I think I hate going back to this, like, you know, employee map, but one of the other, advantages that it will yield is this understanding of what are the processes we need to relook at. And then you take each of those and you look at the ROI from each of those. And there's cascading impact across all of those touch points for sure. But let's say we go back to onboarding and we dig into onboarding and we realize we're still bringing senior managers in, and once a month, even if they're located, we're a remote first company, but we are paying for people to come in once a week for the first 3 months, and that's very expensive. Well, I can save you X amount of dollars because we're going to change onboarding, and we change it so those people come in for 1 week, once a month, and they get everything they would get from that once a week over 3 months, right? We've saved X amount of dollars, right? So there's some ROI there, right? So it depends on there's a lot of context here, right? So considering what are we currently doing? What is the current cost? What is the current impact to all of those metrics, right? So having an understanding of what's important to the business and what's important to employees will also give you the signposts of how to measure any changes and what is necessary to establish what the organization or the employee is going to receive on impact. I think of ROI like that. Like, what am I receiving on impact, right? I don't know actually what it's for. But, I think flipping that for me makes it much clearer for me how for how I tell that story.
I mean, a key metric that is always leaned on is attrition because it is such an expensive cost to the organization, rehiring, backfill. But you're right, back to the point of look at your onboarding, consider how many days to hire from in the recruiting process, consider the data of also increasing your funnel. Are you actually attracting the talent you want if you have any DE&I strategy in place, right? So look at all of those metrics and break them down to evaluate, are they serving the greater purpose and are they being efficient as you aim to execute your transformative strategy? I mean, I think that is how you weave it into the story that you tell to the key stakeholders who want to hear the data to support the why they would agree to this type of change initiative.
And I think again, it's great. I don't think I'm particularly for rote metrics. Like we're always using employee engagement scores, or we're always using attrition, or we're always using. I think the more curated you can make those metrics, the more you're able to identify if it's working or not. If you use the same things for all processes, you potentially lose the ability to like and really expose the nuance in between those. So say for example, like, yes, in onboarding, is there a cost saving that we can do, right? That still drives efficiency, collaboration, right? The connective and the community pieces, right? That's happening. But then also, are we measuring it at 30 days? Like, what are the other measure points we're using? Performance management. Are we currently doing a manual process? Can we automate things? There's a cost savings there, but there's also greater efficiency, time completion changes, right? We get greater uptick from employee engagement would be my right assumption, because people are like, thank God this isn't taking a year off my life to do this every 6 months. Now I'm able to do this. I see it all in place. This is so much, right? So our employee satisfaction increases, right? So you not thinking about these things as these are the only things in like HR measures, right? Like digging really into the map and what the process is. And we designed it for real humans. And is it working for our mission, vision, values? Does it need to change? And how are we going to establish if it's valuable to make those changes? And if we've done what we set out to do we have enough understanding of when we've hit the rails to say, oh, we got to change this? This is not going the way we thought. So, for example, we ran that as a pilot. We did 3 senior managers in a row. We did it where they came for a week, but we started to notice it wasn't actually effective. Okay, cool. Well, we tried it. So what do we have to change? Oh, is it just because the other team members weren't there? So we were bringing, right? So do we actually need to bring? So it's not that when you onboard, right? It's that once a quarter, you onboard totally virtually. We bring everybody together and we bring everybody together for a week. Is this on? Let's try that. Now we've ideated, prototyped, we've iterated based on information, right?
Yep.
So and we're still eyes on the prize for it. These are the metrics we set out. We want to be more cost effective, but we want to make sure that we're getting that community, that connection, that we're really driving that, those, the efficacy of how people are able to work together, right? Those are maybe the other ways that I would think of.
Right. I love that. And the first point is, I think as we come to a close, is asking yourself in this process, are these efforts being designed for a human? As Iris said, question number 1, or have you made a rote tactical decision in putting something in motion that really isn't being considered for the human experience of how it's going to land? That goes from communication to process to change management to, as you mentioned, the onboarding experience. Like all of these need to have the human being as the first and foremost component of designing the programs.
Workforce planning, workforce succession planning, like all of it feeds into this, right? Like, are you designing these things for who and which part of the who?
Right.
Right? Are you designing them for people who only look like you?
Right.
Who were we designing it for? And let's get it on paper. So maybe there's like a little flag like, oh, we're maybe only designing it for one person. And that person potentially be me. Like if I was like, oh, we're only going to do human-centered design, but we're going to do it all from a theater background, I'll be like, that's not it then. our funnel's really small. You can hire 5 people. That's it. Don't do that, guys. Don't do that.
As we come to a close today, are there any final words you would like to share with our audience of listeners, our HR professionals, our armies of one out there doing the day in, day out effort of being change makers against the odds?
If you're an army of one, stay hydrated. Staying, I'll stay hydrated. But I think, I think final, right, to sort of sum up sort of my stump speech is, if this is interesting, it's available to you. There are free courses on IDEO around human-centered design through Acumen Academy. PIN is a free employee mapping tool, as I mentioned. If you're interested in this product mindset around the people experience, Jessica Z has a book that I called Built for People. You can find it on Amazon. She's really laid it out in a different context. You can start doing this. And I hope that you feel, as Olivia mentioned, and I also did, that you are doing this either consciously or unconsciously. And I hope that you found that there are some tools for you to use, because putting it all on paper also as a solo person, which I have done for a very small period of time, allows for people to have, I think there's other stakeholders potentially underestimate the amount of work and the amount of processes and the interconnectedness and the dependencies within those processes across the employee life cycle that live within HR's world of responsibility. So if nothing else, employing an employee journey map will really put on paper the amount of work that is expected for a team of one or a team of, 48 or, 48 plus to achieve and accomplish. And I think putting it on paper is validating for practitioners. Also is a really valuable tool for other cross-functional stakeholders to have a much clearer understanding of what happens, right? And I think can be leveraged to take HR from tactical to transformation.
Well, Iris, thank you so much for your time today, for joining the conversation, speaking to the employee experience, but ultimately the human experience that I think we are both passionate about integrating into our corporate worlds. I love your theater background and your animated storytelling. It's so captivating. So I really appreciate your time. To our audience of listeners, thank you once again for joining us on the Culture Chat, where conversation and culture connect, and look forward to our next episode. Thank you so much.